Welcome to Rad Tech Reality, where we're going to take a look at some of the myths and truths about working in radiology. One of my favorite sayings is the difference between theory and reality is that in theory they are the same, but in reality they are not the same. We're going to take a look at radiology practice for the radiologic technologist today. Medical imaging is a cash cow for healthcare. Healthcare is one of the largest businesses in the United States, and business practices often conflict with the perceived practice of medicine that most people expect. In business, management's loyalty is to the corporation and not the customer, and they will try to do as much business as they can, as cheaply as they can. This in turn has a direct impact on the different healthcare silos or departments, and often we don't think about the impact of management on medical imaging or radiology. What we do find is one of the biggest things in a budget is the healthcare employee's salary, and one of the best ways to make money is to optimize the work by paying the minimum amount for time and effort. One of the challenges of being a radiologic technologist is you're a frontline worker. You work directly with the patients and provide care, acquiring medical images for diagnosis and treatment. Often the patient will tell you things that they cannot tell the radiologist because they don't see the radiologist. And many of these things you need to utilize as information in preparing the exam and providing information for the radiologist interpreting the exam. Patient interaction and communication is one of the main roles of the radiologic technologist. Each patient is unique, from the severe trauma patient to the frequent flyer, and the radiologic technologist has to work with each patient to optimize their exam. It requires more time, effort, and skill to work with a severe trauma patient than a walkie-talkie coming in for a physical exam. Communication. The radiologic technologist acts as an agent through the observation and communication to obtain pertinent information for the physician to aid in diagnosis and treatment of the patient. Like all healthcare workers, Rad Techs, especially those working in emergency rooms or trauma centers, witness some truly horrific and traumatic scenes. Gunshot wounds, injuries from terrible car accidents, patients who have suffered domestic abuse. They may be asked to image body parts that are grotesquely out of place or hanging on by a thread. Those Rad Techs working in other facilities not addressing emergency care also are subject to emotional trauma, watching an elderly patient waste away or seeing a child succumb to cancer. These may not be as gory as the scenes from an ER, but make no mistake, they too leave their mark. Working in healthcare requires people to be actually empathetic and to be able to handle the interaction between patients and healthcare providers without having too great an effect on their personal life. After working many decades in radiology management and as a radiologic technologist and educator, the one thing that I've found true about the management model is you can have this sentence: your facility can provide blank services. The choices are quality, fast, and inexpensive. And in reality, you can only pick two of these services. You cannot have all three. Because if you have quality and fast service, it's not going to be inexpensive. And you have fast and inexpensive service, it's not going to be quality. And if you have inexpensive and quality service, it's sure not going to be fast. Today's radiographer understands the imaging process, has an in-depth knowledge of anatomy, physiology, and patient care, knows what the physician needs to view to make a diagnosis, and can provide diagnostic images that allow that diagnosis to be made. They are also aware of technological changes and information technology practices, as well as being aware of both clinical and business aspects required to successfully provide imaging services. There is a common misconception, and a rather degrading one, that radiologic technologists are little more than button pushers, that the complicated, expensive machines do all the work. Yes, it is true that Rad Techs do push buttons on those machines, but somebody has to know how to make those buttons work. So, what we're looking at here is a lot of knowledge, skill, and on-the-spot critical thinking and problem-solving skills for the professional radiographer or radiologic technologist. Everyone knows who the doctors are, whether surgeon, radiologist, pathologist, but what about the people who actually do the hands-on work, such as radiologic technologists or Rad Techs? They have gone largely unacknowledged as healthcare professionals, except for some specialized radiology imaging services like ultrasound and MRI techs. When we look at certification of radiologic technologists, on the whole, while minimum requirements vary from state to state, RTs are degreed and certified healthcare professionals who have completed an associate's or bachelor's degree in radiologic technology from an accredited 2 or 4-year program, which includes clinical components. Upon graduation from the program, they must pass rigorous registry exams to obtain credentials, and for specific modalities hold professional credentials such as MRI, mammography, CT, etc., in addition to their basic credentials. Then they must apply for a license in the state and have compliance with the state boards of medicine. In most cases, these are the minimum standards to operate equipment that produces ionizing radiation on human beings. Radiologic technologists can enter the field with an associate degree. It typically takes about 2 years to complete, and most states and most employers require radiologic technologists to be certified by passing a test of knowledge such as the ARRT exam. Unfortunately, this is not the CLAD rule, but the standard. We find that you do not have to have the same credentials or training to do radiologic technology in the military, or some states do not have licensure while others allow non-certified technologists or people working under the auspices of the physician to take radiographic images. In these states, the physicians have the responsibility of the operator under their medical license. Of course, this does not assure that the physician has any knowledge about radiologic technology or even radiation safety. For the most part, what we have are physicians that are radiologists who interpret and diagnose the images, and we have radiologic technologists that acquire the images. So what type of education is required for each? Physicians, including radiologists, spend at least 11 years earning their medical degree in their chosen specialty. The physician begins by 4 years in college earning a degree. Then they apply for medical school, and if accepted, they spend 4 years in medical school working closely with patients in the last 2 years. And then all physicians spend 3 to 7 years in their chosen specialty, such as radiology. It usually takes about 12 to 14 years for a radiologist to earn their credentials as a diplomat of the Board of American Radiology. After they get their DABR, they can continue their education and work in a specialty area. We've also discussed the fact that most radiologic technologists are certified and have a license, and you would think that all states would have licensure. It seems absurd, of course, if we were going to irradiate people in general radiography, CT, mammography, or nuclear medicine, and so on, that we would do it without a license. So how could you work in the radiography field and not have a license? If you work for the federal government in the VA or in the military, you do not have to have a license because you're working for the federal government. Generally speaking, the military training for radiologic technologists is excellent, and most of the radiologic technologists do end up with certifications. Not only certifications, but licensures and advanced certifications. I should know because I started out in the U.S. Air Force and later on ended up with a BBA, a BSRT, ARRTR, ARRTMR, CMRT, and CIIP. In fact, I was on the educational committee that designed the testing for the informatics. I've also spent many years in education and lecturing around the United States and literally around the world. Obviously, training and certification is up to the individual, and also licensure. In addition to the federal government, there are actually 6 states in the United States that do not have licensure for radiologic technologists. Licensure is a non-voluntary process by which an agency of government regulates a profession. It grants permission to an individual to engage in an occupation if it finds that the applicant has attained the degree of competency required to ensure the public health and safety and welfare. These states in the United States do not require a license or certification to operate medical equipment using ionizing radiation. They are North Carolina, Missouri, Alabama, Alaska, and South Dakota. In addition to the didactic work that is required to get your certification, radiologic techs also have to have documented clinical education. And clinical education has changed dramatically over the last 30 years as the equipment has evolved and we've gone from film screen to digital imaging. A digital image is not an exact snapshot of reality. It is only a discrete approximation of reality at a specific time. Digital images are comprised of data that can be searched, segregated, and chosen for specific types of views and images. Each imaging modality records the interface of some sort of energy with human tissue, and that provides the data that we utilize to map or create our images. The basic rule for radiologic technologists is to acquire the best image for diagnosis while ensuring patient safety. The radiologic technologist must know of any safety issues with the acquisition of the images that they are taking on the patient and what are the diagnostic images that the interpreting radiologist is seeking to view. This takes a great amount of problem-solving skill and knowledge to come up with a technique and a position that will work to create the image that the radiologist is seeking to interpret. The radiologist cannot diagnose information that they do not have, so it's critical that the radiologic technologist understands what needs to be acquired and how it should be done properly. It is the imaging modality's energies which interact with tissue that is recorded differently in the digital environment from the old film screen environment, allowing us to manipulate the data and create several images from the information that we've acquired without re-exposing the patient. The Rad Tech's job is to get the pertinent information and be able to acquire the images. Most variations in imaging techniques in patient care are relics from the old days of film screen imaging, which we used a photographic process. Today, we have sophisticated imaging modalities and technologies that use advanced algorithms and processes in creating advanced diagnostic images. Does that mean we let the machines do all the work? That's totally false. Radiologic technologists need a variety of skills and a great deal of knowledge about patient care, anatomy, physiology, positioning, and the equipment that they are using and how they create energy that interacts with the tissue to create images. Here is a good example of the difference between a static image or a film screen image and what we can do today with modern digital imaging, looking at specific areas of information and pulling out specific areas of information and looking at details not only in 2D, but 3D and 4D. With digital imaging equipment and the new modalities, the quality of the images is becoming more standardized. The benefits of medical imaging tests rely on both image and interpretation quality, with the latter mainly being handled by the radiologist. However, interpretation is prone to errors and can be limited, since humans suffer from the factors like fatigue and distractions, and quite frankly, every radiologist sees images differently. Not only does the difference in radiologists become apparent, but also the differences in time of interpretation and environment. Sometimes a radiologist will see images in a different environment and have a different interpretation. The human part of the imaging chain seems to be variable. Yet humans can perform analysis that a computer can only find facts. This is why we say that radiologic technology is a science and an art. For the radiologic technologist must not only qualify in knowledge but demonstrate the ability to apply that knowledge, including upgrading their skill and knowledge level as technologies advance and evolve. The skill level of the radiographers or technologists or technicians who operate the imaging machines has a direct bearing on whether a potentially fatal condition is identified and treated or missed entirely. Patients can suffer consequences when technologists lack training, knowledge, and appropriate clinical skills. This is why licensure and certifications have continuing education as a part of the requirement to retain your license or your certification. You have to demonstrate that you are keeping your skills current. The education required for a career in medical imaging is dependent on the specific field of medical imaging that you enter. Some careers require intensive formal training and education, while others involve training on the job or applications training. The weak point in on-the-job training and applications training is this training is modeled on the train the trainer philosophy. In other words, someone comes in and takes one of your people and trains them, and in return, they retain the knowledge base and train the rest of the staff. Sounds good in theory, but in practice, you're only as good as the person who is training you on the equipment, and you only get as much knowledge from them as they have themselves. After your initial certification, one of the things that is a problem is there is no checkup on the individual and how they progressed. There is no national minimum standard for technologists training or competency level, or for the inspection of the medical equipment of the X-ray machines they actually operate. This is a problem. Without a standard, there can be no improvement. Standards are the basis for comparisons before and after. With no standard, you can't objectively tell what has changed or what has improved. With all the chaos and the ridiculous standards that we have to live up to, it would seem like one more problem if we tried to enhance the quality of medical imaging by having a competency test based upon experience and modalities that the operator uses. Continuing education should include competency tests. Licenses are created by a governmental agency and have legal standing. A certification differs from licensing in that it is nearly always offered by a private, non-government agency. Such agencies are usually outgrowths of professional associations, which create certifying agencies to identify and acknowledge those who have met the standard. The confusion lies in there is a difference between certification and licensing. A certification is not a legal license. When we look at risk management, despite the manuals and training and all that's included, I've never seen evaluation of a technical skills listed. Once you are registered or licensed, no one evaluates whether your skill level has kept pace with technology. Yes, we do have mandatory continuing education, but this normally does not include hands-on training or the certification that our manual skills are current with the evolution of the technology. The end result is that automation-based accidents or errors have begun to occur in radiology. So let's take a look at how computerization and automation contribute to errors in medical imaging. With the photographic process of medical imaging that we used to use in film screen, you would find an error and then have to analyze how that error occurred, which was usually obvious. With digital, the errors are not so obvious, and sometimes we miss their occurrence. It is much harder to do quality control on digital imaging than it was with film screen imaging. When analyzing a film screen image, you see what has occurred, and what you have is all that you're going to get. Whereas when you're looking at or analyzing problems in digital imaging, you have 3 different areas to start analyzing. The first area is the acquisition of the digital information, which can be the equipment, the patient, and the techniques used. The next area you have to look at is the electronic workflow, especially when you're looking at the HIS, the RIS, and the PACS, and the information workflow within these systems. Finally, you have to look at display, both the monitor and the environment. Digital medical imaging does have one weak point. Of course, we discussed that before. That's the humans. Humans, the imperfect humans, envisionized, engineered, and built the automation on which medical imaging relies. Furthermore, once designed and made part of medical imaging technology, the same imperfect humans write the software and program for the modality computers. And finally, in one way or another, the automation and the attendant erosion of patient skills and radiologic technology skills plays a major role in missed pathology and reduced patient safety. Those pesky humans can be a problem. When you hear the term medical imaging, the first picture that comes to mind is that of a radiograph or an X-ray, as it is more commonly known. While radiographs are the oldest and still the most frequently employed method of medical imaging, there is so much more to this intriguing and innovative field of science today. With film screen radiography, there was a smaller range or dynamic range of information that could be portrayed on the media. Quality assurance required close monitoring of techniques and processor chemistry to make sure the final image was one that was diagnostic. With digital imaging, CR and DR had a different dynamic range than film screen. As you can see, there was a lot of difference in the type of information being gathered, but we could gather so much more information. even though the exposures may vary greatly. Because of the large dynamic range in digital, it's very difficult to see if there is an overexposure or an underexposure. What we do find is that in underexposures, we get sort of a grainy look, and in overexposures, you lose detail. Digital imaging gives you a much wider dynamic range for exposure, but you have to understand that bad practice still translates into bad images. You need to have the correct exposure factors to begin with, and not rely on the computer to correct your exposure errors. How the image looks can be altered by the computer, even when bad techniques are set. Here's an example of an overexposure, and the overexposure is corrected by the computer using an algorithm to give the image that you should have taken in the first place. The most common error is overexposure because, as we saw earlier, with underexposure in digital, you get a grainy look. With overexposure, you have captured the information. It's just taking the lookup table a while to get to it. The problem here is, what about the exposure to your patient during the examination? This graphic of a histogram and H&D curve demonstrates what underexposure A looks like, regular exposure B looks like, and overexposure C looks like. Notice C looks really good. Because we have lots of exposure or overexposure, it's easy for the computer to pick out what it needs and take an algorithm to make the output look like it should be. A computer is not an intelligent machine. It can only perform based upon the quality of the data provided. Digital imaging is not the end-all cure for all imaging problems. It is still very technologist dependent. Here we see a computer-based imaging system. It's comprised of hardware, software, and of course it requires training. The training is probably the most important part of the imaging process. Remember, as we said, the weakest link in the chain of digital imaging is the human. A digital image is not an exact snapshot of reality. It is only a discrete approximation. The radiographer has control of both image parameters and post-processing. Images sent to the PACS are the images that the radiologist reads. They have no access to the original image to see if you've post-processed out any information that may be of value. That's why some radiologists insist that you send the original image and do no post-processing. Of course, radiologists don't want to spend all their day post-processing images. What we're looking at really is how to save the radiologist from work overload. To do this, AI will not be diagnosing patients and replacing doctors. It will be augmenting their ability to find the key, relevant data they need to care for a patient and present it in a concise, easily digestible format. AI, of course, is artificial intelligence. Let's get to the techie part of the presentation, technology and digital imaging, and the answer to accurate visual diagnosis in utilization of digital imaging requires a great deal of understanding of the technology and techniques used. Unfortunately, some technologists abdicate too much responsibility to automated systems and do not understand or pay attention to the actual information that they're processing. When we look at a human, we often think of the path of least resistance. So, with the equipment so capable of doing so much, would the technical skills of the operator tend to degrade over a period of time? Let's take a look and see. Technologists sometimes rely too much on automated systems, and some technologists actually lack sufficient or in-depth knowledge and skills to properly operate the imaging modalities they use for patient care. So how do we fix that? Well, the obvious fix is understanding that if you don't use it, you lose it. And there's too much truth in that truism to be ignored for radiologic technologists utilizing automated equipment. So let's start with anatomical programming. This feature sounds too good to be true, and oftentimes the problem is that it builds in the mind of the operator that the pre-programmed factory technique will provide the desired image every time, all the time. It just doesn't work that way. It is all but impossible for any manufacturer to build a one-size-fits-all factory program for techniques that will fit any facility. Probably the biggest advantage is giving any operator the ability to begin at that starting point and modify the techniques for their facility. The basics don't change, regardless of the modality or energy of the electromagnetic spectrum we are using to create the image by interaction with the patient's tissue. To put it bluntly, technologists are forgetting the basic of non-automated imaging, and our profession isn't doing what it needs to do to correct the problem. The mistakes being made are medical imaging 101 mistakes, and they are costing lives. Poor quality medical imaging results in interpretation errors. Automated imaging modalities with autopilot features are causing automation addiction among today's radiologic technologists. This is weakening their response time to improper technique application, mechanical failures, and emergencies because they expect the machines to do it for them. So let's take a look at automation addiction in medical imaging. Is automation of medical imaging causing mispathology? That's the question that keeps on giving, but what's the answer? As with everything else, there are plenty of opinions. The first opinion, typically held by older, more experienced radiologic technologist types, is the belief that today's medical imaging utilization of automation is an accident waiting to happen. Too much reliance on automation, they say. Younger people in the field hold a different view. Automation is what makes medical imaging diagnostics essential and safe. And to some extent, both the older and the younger are both correct. The third opinion group feels that technologists should be viewed as a backup to automation. To them, automation is a digital messiah. It can do no wrong. This third group has become the problem. The third group believes that the technologist just performs positioning. Automation takes care of all the technical exposures through algorithms and protocols. Unfortunately, there is a disconnect between the digital images and what exposures were used to acquire them. The computer algorithms produce images that are generic, and often detail is lost due to the fact that the images are modified for presentation by the operator and do not reflect the exposures used. With a digital system, each exposure gives you more data than an analog system. The potential for increasing accuracy of diagnosis is improved because there is that more information captured on every single exposure compared to a film. The caveat is the exposure must be done correctly. Let's see if we can explain it in a simple way. Do you remember being a kid and painting by numbers? What you had to do was fill in each of the areas with the correct color to get the correct image. Basically, by using histogram analysis, the computer is painting by numbers. In this process, we have to set up a minimum and maximum of useful pixel values, or the dynamic range. The peaks on the histogram are a representation of what was captured on a phosphor screen. They are the code values of the pixels. The tall, narrow peaks indicate the differences in densities and usually represent the direct exposure on the plate, in other words, the collimation. The short, wide peaks generally represent the anatomy in shades of gray. The end result is that the histogram is the image. It is merely a two-dimensional bar graph of the intensities that have been mapped on the image. If we take an H&D curve or a D log E curve, what we can do is place it over the histogram itself, and by choosing contrast and brightness, change the image itself that is being displayed. Take a look at this graphic representation of the H&D curve being moved over the histogram and how it affects the final image. Many advancements have been made in the field of digital radiography in recent years, including artificial intelligence-aided X-ray interpretation, dual energy imaging, tomosynthesis, and computer-aided diagnosis, along with automatic image stitching, and of course digital mobile radiography. These advancements have improved imaging quality, helping to enhance patient care and support better patient outcomes. Digital technology sits at the center of digital radiography. This advance from X-ray inspection has become prominent in the medical imaging field over the past decade. New advances continue to transform the field of radiology. For example, virtual reality and augmented reality to create immersive training for future radiology professionals. DeepMind to reduce false results for cancer screening. Cardiac MRI, segmentation to deliver real-time diagnosis. And augmented intelligence or artificial intelligence to automate mundane manual tasks, leaving the radiologist capable of spending more time doing interpretation and analysis. With the different types of imaging devices employed today and the unique data that they produce, integration and ease of collaboration are of paramount interest to healthcare institutes and end users. Almost all types of images today are acquired digitally and consist of huge data files. All this data is usually handled by the computer, sort of like on autopilot. But you need to understand what happens when the autopilot disengages and you have to manage the data and produce the image manually. Technology goes throughout the entire spectrum of the world today, including airline pilots. So let's use a little analogy comparing medical imaging technologists to airline pilots and see where we are headed. Radiologic technologists require not only the knowledge, but the skill sets of how to apply that knowledge in doing their job, just the same as an airline pilot. Interestingly, a new study by the FAA says that pilots often abdicate too much responsibility to automated systems. It also found that in more than 60% of accidents, pilots had trouble manually flying the plane or made mistakes with automated flight controls. You may have heard a similar analysis of automation in radiology earlier. Aircraft instrumentation is very complex, but much of it is controlled by a computer. Flyers would be shocked at how much time the pilot actually spends flying the plane and how much time they actually spend on autopilot sitting in the seat. What happens to the pilot when the computers go dead? How do they manage all those controls and fly the plane? Hopefully, they can become aware of the problem and control the plane manually. To ensure that the pilot is able to handle the emergency, the pilot should have continuing education and practice manual flying. And the pilots have a number of support systems with their software engineers and their mechanics, the same as radiologic technologists have a lot of support from their service engineers and continuing education. Well, thanks for watching, and we hope you enjoyed Rad Tech Reality.